It's the kind of property that looks almost too easy on paper. A small house a few minutes from a university campus, 4 bedrooms, a driveway, a basement, nothing luxurious, nothing that looks like the beginning of a serious real estate business. But when I first looked at a property like this, I wasn't thinking about it the way a normal buyer would. I wasn't asking whether I liked the kitchen. I was asking how many students I could legally rent rooms to, how much each room could produce every month, and how much money would still be left after the mortgage, taxes, insurance, utilities, repairs. A normal landlord might look at the house and see one tenant. I saw 4. If I rented the entire property to one family for $2,400 a month, my gross rental income would be $2,400. But if I rented 4 bedrooms separately for $800 each, the same building could produce $3,200. Same roof, same mortgage, same property taxes, but potentially $800 more revenue every month. That was the idea that pulled me in. My name is Michael Carter, and when I started looking for my first student rental near a university in Ohio, I thought I had found a smarter version of ordinary rental property. Students arrived every year. At first, the math looked almost unfairly good. Then I started calculating what it would actually cost to get the property ready. The purchase price was only the first number. I needed a down payment large enough to satisfy the lender. Then there were closing costs, inspections, and insurance before I even received the keys. After that came the house itself. The walls needed paint, 2 bedrooms needed new flooring, several doors did not lock properly, the bathroom fixtures were old, and the kitchen appliances looked worn out. None of those repairs were individually terrifying. Together, they became a second budget. Then came furniture. Because furnished rooms could justify higher rent, I wanted each bedroom to have a bed, mattress, desk, chair, lamp, and basic storage. The common areas needed a sofa, dining table, kitchen supplies, and enough seating for several tenants. I also needed smoke detectors, stronger locks, cleaning supplies, internet equipment, and dozens of small items that still had to be paid for. The more I added, the more my definition of buying the house changed. I was not just buying real estate. I was funding a small operating business before it had earned anything. Suppose the property cost $350,000 and I put down 20% or $70,000. But if closing costs added $11,000, renovations required $18,000, furniture cost $8,000, and setup expenses absorbed another $4,000, my cash requirement was closer to $111,000. That was nearly $41,000 more than the down payment alone, and I still had not collected rent. That was my first real lesson. The property could look profitable once occupied and still create a cash problem before the first student moved in. So I stopped asking only whether the house could make money. I started asking whether I had enough cash to survive the process of making it ready. That meant keeping money in reserve instead of spending every available tinge on the purchase. If I emptied my account just to close the deal, one broken water heater or unexpected repair could force me into debt before the business had even started. By the time I finished the budget, I understood something I had missed when I first saw that 4-bedroom house. The opportunity was real, but the profit was not automatic. The house would only work if I bought at the right price, controlled renovation costs, furnished it without overspending, and kept enough cash available for the expenses that appeared before the rent did. And even then, one question mattered more than all the others. Could I actually keep those 4 rooms full? That meant demand, not the house itself, would decide whether my first investment became a business or an expensive lesson. Once I had the house ready, the next question was simple. Where did the profit actually come from? At first, I assumed the answer was obvious: rent. But student rentals do not work exactly like normal rentals because the real advantage comes from splitting one property into several income streams. Instead of renting the entire house to one family, I rented each bedroom individually. If a family was willing to pay $2,400 per month for the whole house, that put a ceiling on what I could earn. But 4 students paying $800 each produced $3,200. That extra $800 did not require another building. It came from using the same building differently. And once I understood that, I started looking at every part of the property as something that could either produce income or sit there doing nothing. A larger room with better furniture could rent for more than a smaller room. A bedroom with a private bathroom could command a premium. If one room had more space, better light, or extra storage, I did not have to charge the same rent for all 4 rooms. I could price each room according to what a student was actually getting. Furnishing also changed the economics. At first, furniture looked like another startup expense, but many students did not want to buy a bed, desk, chair, and storage for a place they might only use for one school year. If spending $1,600 to furnish a room allowed me to charge an extra $120 per month, that added $1,440 in annual revenue. Then I noticed the driveway. If the house had 4 bedrooms but 5 usable parking spaces, I could rent the extra space separately. Even $100 per month from one parking space meant $1,200 per year. The basement created another possibility. Secure storage for bicycles, boxes, or seasonal belongings could carry a small monthly fee. Then came laundry. A washer and dryer cost money, but paid laundry could create another small stream of income. None of these extras looked impressive by themselves. I was learning that rental profit was not always created by one giant decision. Sometimes it came from stacking several small income sources on top of the base rent. So I built a simple monthly model. 4 rooms at $800 each gave me $3,200. A premium for 2 furnished rooms could add $240. Parking might add $100. Laundry and storage could contribute another $120. Now the property was producing $3,660 in gross monthly revenue instead of $2,400 from a traditional family lease. But gross revenue was not profit. Every extra tenant increased usage, more showers, more electricity, more wear on doors, floors, furniture, appliances, and bathrooms. More people also meant more chances that something would break. So while room-by-room renting increased revenue, it also increased operating intensity. I could not compare $3,660 in student rent with $2,400 from a family and assume I was $1,260 richer every month. I had to pay everything required to keep the property running. If one student moved out, I did not necessarily lose all my rental income. 3 occupied rooms could continue producing cash while I searched for a 4th tenant. With a single-family lease, one vacancy could reduce the property's rental revenue to 0, but this created a different dependency. I needed a steady supply of students. The numbers only worked when enough rooms stayed occupied for enough months of the year. A property with 4 bedrooms was not automatically a 4-income property. It became one only when 4 people were willing to pay for those rooms. That was when I stopped thinking of the house as just real estate. I was selling convenience, location, furniture, parking, privacy, and proximity to campus. This building was only the container. The real business was filling it, pricing it correctly, and finding enough small ways to make the property earn more without making it too expensive for the students I needed to keep it full. Once the rooms were filled, the property finally started producing the kind of revenue I had imagined. Money came in from 4 separate tenants, parking added a little more, furnished rooms brought in a premium. But this was also the moment when I learned the most dangerous habit in rental property, looking at rent before looking at expenses. If the house collected $3,660 in a good month, I could not treat $3,660 as income I had earned for myself. The mortgage came first, then property taxes, then insurance, then electricity, water, heating, internet, trash service, and the cost of keeping the common areas usable. Because I rented rooms separately, I could not simply tell one family to put every utility in its own name. Students expected a simple monthly payment, so many of those bills stayed with me. That made the property easier to rent, but my profit depended on behavior I could not fully control. If one tenant left the heating high all winter, I paid for it. If 4 students took long showers every day, I paid for it. If someone left lights, televisions, and computers running constantly, the utility bill did not care that my rent was fixed. I stopped treating utilities as predictable. They were a variable cost, attached to how the tenants lived. Then came maintenance. A normal house already wears down over time, but a student house can experience much faster turnover. Doors get slammed, furniture gets moved, walls get marked, chairs break, mattresses wear out. Appliances are used by several unrelated people instead of one household. None of that meant every student would damage the property. It meant I had to budget for heavier use and replacement. Suppose my monthly mortgage was $1,750, property taxes and insurance averaged another $450. The property could generate much more revenue than a normal rental and still leave a surprisingly small amount of profit. And the school calendar created another layer of cost. At the end of the academic year, several tenants might move out within the same few weeks. That meant inspections, cleaning, repainting, replacing damaged items, repairing small problems, and preparing rooms for the next group. If one room needed a new mattress, another needed wall repairs, and the kitchen table had to be replaced, the turnover bill could arrive all at once. So I started creating a reserve. Every month, part of the rent stayed in the property account instead of coming to me. That money was not profit. It was protection against the months when the house demanded cash. I also learned to separate repairs from improvements. Replacing a broken lock kept the property operating. Buying better desks because I wanted to charge more rent was an investment. A new roof, however, could wipe out years of small monthly gains if I had never planned for it. That distinction changed how I judged the property. I stopped asking how much cash was left after an average month. I started asking whether the house could survive a bad one. Could I cover the mortgage if one room stayed empty? Could I replace a failed water heater without borrowing? Could I handle a large turnover bill before the next students paid deposits? Those questions mattered more than the impressive gross rent. By then, I understood that student rentals were not profitable because students paid a lot. They were profitable only when the difference between rent and total operating cost stayed wide enough for long enough. Revenue created the opportunity. Expense control decided whether I actually kept any of it. The first 3 years made student rentals look almost predictable to me. Rooms filled before the semester began. Rent arrived from several tenants instead of one household. Even when a student moved out, the other rooms continued producing income. That made the business feel safer than it really was. Then I started studying what happened to another investor, Daniel Brooks, who had bought a large house near a college in Indiana. His property looked stronger than mine on paper. It had more bedrooms, more space, and more potential rent. When Daniel bought it, enrollment at the nearby college was high enough that landlords rarely struggled to find tenants. He assumed that demand would continue. That assumption became the most expensive part of the deal. A few years later, student enrollment started falling. There were simply fewer students competing for the same number of rooms around campus. Daniel lowered the rent on a few rooms, hoping that a cheaper price would bring students back. It helped a little, but lower rent created a second problem. His mortgage did not fall. Property taxes did not fall. Insurance did not fall. The roof, furnace, plumbing, and electrical system did not become cheaper to maintain because fewer students were living there. Most of his major expenses were fixed. His revenue was not. That was the trap. Imagine a 6-bedroom property renting each room for $750 per month. Fully occupied, it could produce $4,500 in gross monthly rent. If the mortgage, taxes, insurance, utilities, maintenance, and other operating costs totaled $3,400, the property could leave roughly $1,100 before larger repairs and reserves. That looked healthy. But if 2 rooms stayed empty, monthly revenue dropped by $1,500. Now the house produced only $3,000, while many of the same expenses remained. The property had gone from apparently profitable to losing money without anything physically breaking. Then the situation became worse because vacancies affected pricing. When several landlords around the same college were chasing fewer students, each owner had to compete harder. Some offered lower rent, others included utilities, some upgraded furniture, or offered shorter leases. Every concession made the property more attractive to tenants, but each one reduced the owner's margin. I realized that student rentals had a risk I had barely considered. My business was connected to the health of the university beside it. If enrollment grew, demand could make my property stronger. If enrollment fell, The same location that once made the house valuable could become a weakness. Daniel eventually considered selling. That created another problem. A normal family might not want a large house configured around student tenants. Another investor would value it based on the income it could produce, but the income was already declining. That meant buyers were not willing to pay the price Daniel needed. Selling quickly could lock in a major loss. Holding the property meant continuing to cover expenses while hoping demand recovered. Neither choice was comfortable. So I started watching more than my own lease applications. I paid attention to university enrollment, new student housing projects, nearby rents, competing properties, and how early students began searching for rooms. I wanted to know whether demand was weakening before my bank account told me. Daniel's mistake was not simply buying a bad house. He bought a property whose success depended heavily on one source of demand and assumed that source would remain stable. That was the lesson I carried forward. A student rental can survive broken furniture, a repair bill, or even a temporary vacancy. What it struggles to survive is a long decline in the number of people who need the rooms. And once that happens, the problem is no longer the house. The problem is the market around it. The risk became impossible for me to ignore after that. By the time I understood the risks, I stopped thinking about student rentals as an easy way to collect more rent from the same house. I started thinking about them as a business that only works when the location keeps producing demand. That changed how I judge properties. I no longer cared about being somewhere in the same city as a university. I wanted to be close enough that students could walk to campus in minutes. A house a few minutes from a large university could attract students who wanted to walk to class. And if a new group of students arrived every year, I was not depending on one tenant to stay forever. I was depending on a repeating cycle of demand. That was the first time the business started to feel scalable. Suppose my 4-room house produced $3,200 in base rent each month. If demand stayed strong, a small increase of $40 per room would add $160 per month, or $1,920 per year. Over several years, gradual increases could change the economics, but I learned not to confuse higher rent with guaranteed profit. If taxes, insurance, repairs, utilities, and maintenance rose just as quickly, the extra revenue could disappear. The real goal was increasing revenue faster than my total operating costs. Cash flow mattered. 2 or 3 well-located properties could spread some of the risk. If one room was empty, rent from the others could still support the portfolio. But more properties also meant more complexity. More tenants, more leases, more furniture, more maintenance calls, more turnover. Scaling did not remove the work. It multiplied both the income and the number of things that could go wrong. That was my second major reversal. I had imagined that owning several rentals would automatically make the business safer. In reality, it only became safer if I kept enough cash in reserve, maintained high occupancy, and avoided buying too quickly. A portfolio with weak properties was not diversification. It was several problems under one owner, so I became more selective. I wanted large universities with consistent enrollment, established student neighborhoods, and houses close enough to campus that location itself did part of the marketing. Most importantly, I wanted deals that survived realistic expenses. A large house with 8 bedrooms could produce impressive gross revenue, but if it needed major repairs, carried high taxes, or sat too far from campus, I could end up with more rooms and less profit. A smaller house in a stronger location could be the better business. Over time, I stopped measuring success by how many properties I owned. I measured it by how reliably each property produced cash after every real expense was paid. That was when student rentals finally made sense to me. The business was not about buying houses near colleges. It was about buying repeatable demand at a price that left enough margin for mistakes. When the campus was strong, the location was right. The rooms stayed full, and I controlled costs. The model could become powerful. One property could help fund the next down payment. The next property could add another stream of cash flow. Over years, several ordinary houses could become a stable portfolio. But I also knew what could break the model: vacancy, falling enrollment, overpaying, underestimating repairs, running out of cash, growing faster than I could manage. So if I had to reduce everything I learned to one lesson, it would be this: the money in student rentals is not created by the number of bedrooms. It is created by the gap between what those bedrooms reliably earn and what the property continuously costs. That gap is the business. Protect it, and one small house can become the start of something much larger. Ignore it, and even a property full of tenants can slowly drain my cash. That is why I no longer ask whether a student rental can make money. I ask whether it can keep making money when the easy assumptions stop being true. If this video helped you understand the real economics of student rentals, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and check out the other videos for more realistic breakdowns of how money and business actually work.